850,000 Bitcoin. Gone. Not stolen in a dramatic heist, not lost in a fire, simply vanished from the ledgers of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, leaving behind nothing but a bankruptcy filing and a question that would haunt digital finance for a decade. How do you lose something that was never supposed to be losable? To understand what happened at Mt. Gox, you have to understand what Mt. Gox was. In 2013, if you wanted to buy Bitcoin, there was a very good chance your money passed through servers in Shibuya, Tokyo, operated by a French developer named Marc Karpels. At its peak, Mt. Gox handled somewhere between 70 and 80% of all global Bitcoin transactions. It was not just an exchange. It was, for most of the world, the on-ramp to cryptocurrency itself. If Mt. Gox said Bitcoin was worth $1,200, and in late 2013 it did, then that was the price of Bitcoin. The exchange had that kind of weight. Karpels had acquired Mt. Gox in 2011 from its original creator, Jed McCaleb, for a reported $0 and the assumption of its liabilities. The name itself is a relic. The site had originally been built to trade Magic, the Gathering cards online. Magic the Gathering Online e-exchange. Mt. Gox. Karpels pivoted it entirely to Bitcoin, and for a while it printed money. But underneath, the trading volume and the rising prices was an operation that former employees would later describe as chaotic, under-resourced, and built on code that had never been properly audited. Here is the mechanism, explained as plainly as possible. When you deposited Bitcoin into Mt. Gox, the exchange held it for you in a digital wallet. You trusted them the way you trust a bank. The Bitcoin was supposed to be there when you wanted it back. But Bitcoin transactions have a quirk, a technical feature called transaction malleability. Without getting lost in the cryptography, what this means is that under certain conditions, the unique ID attached to a Bitcoin transaction could be altered slightly after it was broadcast to the network, before it was confirmed. The transaction would still go through. The Bitcoin would still move, but the ID would be different from what Mt. Gox's internal system expected to see. The exchange's software, allegedly, was not built to handle this. When the system checked whether a withdrawal had been processed and found no matching ID, it would sometimes flag the transaction as failed, even though the Bitcoin had already left the wallet. In those cases, the software would allegedly process the withdrawal again. The Bitcoin moved twice. The internal ledger showed one withdrawal. This is not a sophisticated hack in the Hollywood sense. There was no team of masked figures in a dark room. It was a bookkeeping failure, compounded over time, in a system handling hundreds of millions of dollars. How long this had been occurring is disputed. Japanese court records and subsequent forensic investigations suggest that losses may have begun accumulating as early as 2011. For years, the gap between what Mt. Gox's book said it held and what it actually held in its wallets apparently grew wider. Karpels has said publicly that he was unaware of the full scale of the problem until it was too late. Critics, creditors, and prosecutors have argued otherwise. By early 2014, the pressure became impossible to contain. Users had been complaining for weeks about delayed withdrawals. In February, the exchange halted all Bitcoin withdrawals entirely, citing technical issues. The official statement used careful language about transaction malleability. Customers waited. Days passed. Then, on February 28, 2014, Mt. Gox filed for bankruptcy protection in a Tokyo court. The filing revealed the number that would echo through every financial news desk on Earth: 850,000 Bitcoin belonging to customers, and approximately 100,000 Bitcoin belonging to the company itself were gone. At the prices of that day, the total loss was somewhere in the range of 450 to 480 million US dollars. At Bitcoin's later peak prices, those coins would have been worth tens of billions. The bankruptcy proceedings that followed were years-long, grinding, and deeply frustrating for the roughly 127,000 creditors scattered across dozens of countries. Japanese bankruptcy law applied, which meant creditors were legally entitled to the yen value of their Bitcoin at the time of the bankruptcy. Not the current market price, not what the coins might be worth later. When Bitcoin's value soared in subsequent years, this distinction became financially brutal. Someone owed 10 Bitcoin in 2014 yen terms would receive a fraction of what those coins were actually worth on the open market. Mark Karpels was arrested by Japanese authorities in August 2015. He was charged with embezzlement and data manipulation, specifically, allegations that he had manipulated Mt. Gox's systems to inflate his account balance by approximately 341 million yen, and that he had misappropriated customer funds. In 2019, a Tokyo court convicted him of data manipulation, but acquitted him of embezzlement. He received a suspended sentence of 2.5 years. He did not go to prison. The conviction was later upheld on appeal. A separate mystery ran parallel to the bankruptcy. In 2015, approximately 200,000 Bitcoin were discovered in a cold wallet that Mt. Gox had apparently overlooked. This brought the confirmed missing total to around 650,000 coins, still the largest cryptocurrency loss ever recorded at the time. Those recovered coins became part of the bankruptcy estate, slowly making their way through the Japanese legal system toward creditors. In the background, a different narrative was developing. U.S. federal investigators and blockchain analysis firms traced a significant portion of the missing Bitcoin to a Russian national named Alexander Vinnik, who allegedly operated a cryptocurrency exchange called BTCE that had allegedly received stolen funds. Vinnik was arrested in Greece in 2017. The case became an international legal tug-of-war between the United States, Russia, and France, each seeking extradition. French courts convicted him in 2023. American charges remain pending as of this writing. The full picture of where all 850,000 coins went has never been entirely reconstructed in a single public document. Creditors waited. They organized. They formed committees. They hired lawyers in Tokyo who billed in yen, while their claims sat in a legal system moving at its own deliberate pace. By 2023, nearly a decade after the bankruptcy filing, a rehabilitation plan was finally approved that would allow creditors to receive repayment, some in Bitcoin, some in Bitcoin Cash, some in yen, through approved exchanges. The actual distribution of funds began in 2024. For some creditors, the payout arrived with a bittersweet arithmetic. The recovered Bitcoin had appreciated so dramatically that even a partial recovery represented more dollars than the original deposit, while others had spent years and significant legal fees for outcomes they considered deeply inadequate. Here is what the autopsy shows. Mt. Gox did not fail because Bitcoin itself failed. The underlying asset kept working. Transactions kept clearing on the blockchain. The failure was institutional. A small company handed enormous responsibility it was not equipped to carry, operating on code that had not been built for the scale it reached. allegedly without the internal controls that a custodian of that magnitude demanded. Every dollar, every coin, every fortune lost in this story passed through a system that its operators either could not or did not adequately understand. The lesson written in those 850,000 missing coins is not about cryptocurrency specifically. It is older than that. Money that moves through a structure you cannot see, cannot audit, and cannot hold accountable is money resting on trust alone. And trust, as every forensic examiner of financial collapse eventually learns, is not a safeguard. It is an assumption. The moment the assumption is tested, what remains is the gap between what the ledger says and what is actually there. And sometimes that gap is 850,000 Bitcoin wide.